This system is based on sacred text, on Rat. You as 80 for the agnostic.
Yeah, okay. That yes, agnostic. I had phases, so I did. Yeah, much like I did parts of him my side to be a Christian, though I would say bad drastic, yeah. But the sacred text appeals to the reader, uh, through what it communicates, what experience it generates, how the emotion it evokes.
Uh, so, for example, Ziauddin was translating the Quran. It was a Christian government. He's translating the Quran, and in the forward he says, "Well, I started translating the Quran, very difficult. One of the few translations which has verses in it. It's nicely done. This is actually at the end of the day, I came to the conclusion that this book has some divine content in it. It's something divine about the nature of the book. So there are certain people who, when they read the Quran, they feel the divinity in there, right? And that is the essential source of relief. Quran is sound. You feel it as a sound. It's emotion. You feel the emotion. It's a book of guidance. You get guidance out of it. In a sense, it's not like Bible, not like Torah. It's quite a Kipri kind of text. It doesn't have a beginning or the end, any conventional sense. But it has it's almost like symphony. It has the structure that is its own. It has the language that is own. So when I was saying that when you asked me about Arabic, people can win a Parhani, they're better than Parhani. Arab Quran itself said is in the million Arabic. So in the sense, yeah. But in language is not is something quite different. Language, for example, is spoken. The language is dynamic. It changes. The words change. The meanings of the words change. New words are added. Old words die. So language is like an ecology, right? Right? It's a living ecology. Any language can live. But the Quran is not like that. The words are fixed, right? So nobody speaks the Quran. So it's not a language in the conventional sense, right? It has its own wonder. Now, that's what I think Islam is. It's based on belief system, but it's also culture and civilization, and it's the way of looking and shaping the world, which is what the essence of the Quranic teaching is. Right? Now, we also know those who have gone through the text that like 600-700 verses in the Quran ask you to think, reflect, use reason, um, and do not look kindly on those who are blind colors, who are like sheep, or it gives various examples of that. Who do not lose their ears, who do not use their eyes to higher eyes. So the faith here is not completely blind, has some rational basis. So that's what I think. So the question now is, what is science? Now, we could do three things to say here. First, we can define science as a system of uh, knowledge production that is based on certain universal criteria. So one criteria would be kind of empiricism. Most science is experimental, right? Whether criteria is universal, that by very nature, what science establishes is something that is applicable in all societies, in all cultures. It's not limited to a particular culture. We can also say that there's a philological structure. Science works within the theory. Scientific outlining the experiments, they work within a system, which Thomas Kuhn called the paradigm, which itself is a belief system, by the way. The paradigm by that piece is a belief system. So scientists work in this system to produce knowledge that is reasonably objective and that is accepted by the scientific community through a process of criticism, publication, and so on and so forth. But most importantly, whatever the end product, it can be replicated by any way. It's not secret. It's not sacred. it's universal applicable in a sense. So, but enough. If you want to send a probe to the moon, you can send it whether you're Chinese or American or Indian or even Malaysian. But the physics involved is not culture based. It's universally applicable. Right. So that's essentially what science. But science is not what conventionally thought of. It's not the pursuit of truth. Conventional notion of science is as Greek, heroic Galileo, Copernicus, Paglagius, you know, dogmatic people discovering an ultimate truth, right? It's not. Scientists nowadays don't go around discovering ultimate truth. They do puzzle solve. They do what fools say. Most scientists in the world spend their time puzzle solving small puzzles, which then connect to a bigger puzzles too. For example, if you're doing cancer research, there'll be hundreds of scientists who will be working on one particular problem of cancer, looking at different aspects. And the solution would be when they all put the papers together to find a new a cure or whatever they're doing. So, so that's essentially, and much of the science in contemporary times is basically done by either the military or the corporation or nowadays with this billionaires. Right? Quite not 30, 40 years ago, the governments played a major role and the universities made a major role in doing scientific research. Nowadays, the governments play somewhat lesser role and universities play even lesser role. Most universities have become teaching machines and they don't really promote research. Very few do kind of both fundamental scientific research or applied science kind of research. So that which you can, but there's one other thing. We may think that everything in science is objective, but it may not be right, right? Because science also has a subjective side, and the subjective sides comes in number of ways. So first, it basically comes as policy, what we call science policy. So if a government, for example, decide, so in England now the new government decided to put a lot of money on AI. Right? So that's a subjective decision. They could put the same amount of money, for example, in creating a new housing structure because the housing problem has reached almost a pandemic level. That's more homeless in certain parts of England than there are in Bangladesh. Right? Well, right? But they chose to put money in one and not the other. Both can be approached scientifically and both can find with some sort of potential solution. And so that's the policy decision and that's the subjective decision. Why would you put money in, say, for example, cancers and not in diarrhea research? Or why would you put money in HIV/AIDS and not read from about mortality, etc. So that's the first thing, the funding. And the second level of subjectivity comes in by the way you ask the questions, in a sense. So policy and then the funding, where there's the funding coming from. The funding dictates a lot. So for example, nowadays, there is a phenomenal amount of space research, which did not exist, say, 20 years ago, because we didn't have billionaires like Musk putting in money in space technology. Um, or there's a phenomenal amount of research on virtual worlds because they didn't have Meta and people like that with billions and billions of dollars putting money there. So the funding is also very important. That's where the subjective side comes in as well, in a sense. So so policy and funding, and then how you ask the questions. How you ask the question that you are actually investigating and what methodology you use. So when I was a young man, I was very impressed by a man called Al-Bruri. I was in Pakistan a very day ago, and there was a conference organized by Hamza Foundation, which is a Islamic Medicine Foundation. on Brunei. I went in, and there was 3 or 4 day conference. So many papers were presented. I was just totally besotted by the line. I was so impressed. And something that Brunei said, which is stuck to me to this day, said that every word of inquiry, like knowledge system, has its own methodology. There is no such thing as the method. There are only methods, and each method applies to a particular mode of inquiry. You can't use a method designed for one mode of inquiry for another mode of inquiry. So, for example, we measure the space in the gravity of certain metals. We measure the coordinates in cities, and the book is called the coordinate of cities. And he was quite an exact scientist, and in how what we will regard today as an exact scientist. And he basically he did what we call scientific. But when came to study India, he said that I can't use this particular method. I have to use a different method to study India. We wrote a book called India, which is describing the Indian civilization. Right. And he used what we may call today the methods of social sciences, more qualitative analysis and quantitative analysis, more observation than empirical experiment. And then he was interested in yoga, and then he came to the conclusion that, hang on, none of my methodology is going to work here. And he didn't dismiss yoga like many contemporary Muslim scholars do, al-Haram and all that. He said, to understand yoga, you need to understand Hindu metaphysics. To understand Hindu metaphysics, the first thing you need to say as the Muslim that you do not denounce it, right? That you accept as a knowledge system. And only when you understand Hindu metaphysics, you really understand yoga. Therefore, the methodology for understanding and appreciating yoga is totally different than the methodology for measuring specific gravity of methods or understanding India as a culture and civilization, because it's a metaphysical, but is to really the right and required to completely different. So different methods are required for different modes of inquiry. You don't be necessarily cross one methodology for. So that's essentially my picture of science. So now we come to answer first of all your question. Does what was it? What was the question? The science does
No, it's not a question. It's a certainty. The Quran contains plenty of scientific facts. We use like that.
is science and Quran contains plenty of scientific facts. Okay, so first things, as I said, the Quran is a sacred text. It's a book of guidance. Al-Islam is like a kitab al. It's a book of guidance. So it provides you guidance. And the guidance is that essentially you believe the text is universal, and the guidance is universal and for all time. In a sense. And the guidance is provided in numerous ways. It's provided through direct exhortation, like there's no compulsion in religion, free the slave. Two statements that are very stark and simple. No compulsion in religion, free the slave. Muslims hardly proper free the slave when Rabbas came in. Maybe one other companion, but hardly anybody else. Because slavery was abolished in Saudi Arabia in 1950. There's no compulsion in religion. Look around the Muslim world and see how much compulsion there is, right? Or look at the Sharia and look at how much compulsion there is in the Sharia. So there are specific statements of guidance, but also the guidance can be related through anecdotes, Arabics, metaphors. Sacred texts use metaphors a lot, right? And the Quran uses that, and by giving certain observational texts, sun and the sea and meters and so on and so forth. Now, all of these are matter of kind of there to force you to think and reflect. Right? They're not substitute for you doing the work yourself. Right? There is nothing in the Quran that will give you a discovery. Right? There's a great deal in the Quran that will give you a spiritual high, that will motivate you to do good. Yeah. That will emotionally connect you to God. Right? But the discoveries you make yourself. Right? You use reason, you use your abilities, thinking abilities to make the discovery and understand the science. There are two types of science: science of God. The Quran is said to be considered a sign of God, but nature is another act of God. You interpret nature yourself. In other words, you God and shape the world, right, yourself. That is not something that that is going to happen automatically. Science requires you to roll your sleeves, right, and do the empirical work, right. Make sure your experiments can be repeated by everybody. Get the system working, and then so on and so forth. That one other thing to consider is that science, despite being on an objective, is not fixed. For example, when I was growing up in the 60s and 70s, the dominant view of the universe was the steady state theory. Frank Hoyle was a very famous astronomer. His theory was that the universe has always been static. Right, that's how it is. Right. Uh, I remember Al-Azhar issued a little booklet. I still probably got it in my house somewhere, which told us, well, this steady state theory is very uh, uh, related to what the Quran says about Zod or whatever, right? And about cosmos and so on and so forth. But of course, in the 70s or 80s, steady theory were rejected. We had the Big Bang theory. Then we had lots of stuff. People writing the Big Bang, the concept B, and that's the Big Bang, right? Etc. Etc. So, if the Quran is eternal and some of these things are absolute, what you're actually doing, you are creating something that is a metaphysical truth, is something that may be objective, but may not actually change as well. So then you will have to change the text as well at the same time. If you, one scientific theory was maybe dominant in one particular period, may be displaced, then you add the second, better scientific theory, which is exactly what Kuhn talks about. He talks about paradigm shift in novel science and revolutionary science, and so on and so forth. So I would argue that yes, there are various things in the Quran that can be interpreted in inverted commas, scientific texts, etc., etc. But they are not a substitute either for doing science or for taking them as absolute facts. Many of them may be there just to restate certain point, draw attention to certain aspects of the cosmos, force you to think, force you to get close to God. The another point is the psychological point, and that is this: that if you accept Quran as a sacred text, you get quite attached to it, of course. And many Muslims have psychological relationship with the text that we know and carry that down with them all the time. I see people reading on the past with pain, that is that. Uh, and if you find some meaning that you think is scientific, it gives you a scientific picture. Look, our text is so good that it's got a scientific, So people have discovered relativity, electricity, geology, and God knows what else. Right? This is the psychotherapy. This is the psychological trick. Of course, the Quran talks about the mountains and all. But of course, the Quran, talks about the fetuses and how the fetus develops and all that. But it's not the textbook of biology. It's a book of guidance. If you want to really discover, human biology, you have to study human biology properly. You'll pursue the science. There's certain aspects of human beings which we still do not understand over anatomy. Right? I don't want to tell you what it is, but only 2 weeks ago, the paper was published. It's first time that we certain parts of human anatomy about this we knew nothing, and we think we are very clever, right? So the hell of a lot to discover. Human anatomy, right? There's the hell of a lot to do and discover, but it's not going to be. You're not going to make a discovery by wrapping your Quran, because Quran is not book scientific book of text. It's a book of guidance. It forces you to look at nature and make discoveries. It doesn't give you discoveries. It doesn't give you scientific facts. It forces you to go and find scientific facts. Right. Once a paradigm is established, then it becomes necessary for most of us to accept the paradigm or demolish it by research in a sense. So the evolution is a pretty established fact of science, contemporary science, right? To just dismiss it, it will be a very foolish thing to do. Not to say very arrogant. No, it be there. However, if you are disturbed by it, when you take it be genetics, right? You need to see your level your science properly and actually quick that the position does work. Yeah. This means you are to your series and do real science. Just saying it, that is not trace, that it disturbs my belief, doesn't cut it. But let me tell you something else. You know who the first evolutionary person was? First person to conceive of evolution in the Darwinian fashion, like 6, 7, 800 before Darwin. It's a book called Darwin's Shadow. Google it now, find it. Book's called Darwin's Shadow. The first chapter is devoted to Al-Jais. The woman argues that the first person to discover evolution or talk about evolution by studying animals and birds was Al-Jais, the Andalusian scientist, literary philosopher. Sorry, I was not Andalusian.
Alfred Russel Wallace?
No, Alfred Russel Wallace was said now. This is interesting. Russel Wallace is now being reinstated as co-developer of Version P. But right, he was isolated, right? But last 10 years he's making a comeback at not just Darwin did that, but Russell. No, this if you look at Darwin Shadows, I think you find that Al-Jahis and let me tell you something else. And this you can check, buddy. There's a book called The Life of Hai. Okay? Book called Life of Hai, written by Ibn Fan at 12th century Greek philosopher. And in Life of Hai, Hai emerges from the slime in the ocean and is spontaneously degenerate very well being. He sees a deer. Sorry? The deer? Yeah, he sees a deer or something like that, and his first contact, I think, pursues its mother when he had to, and he's looked after that, and then the deer dies, he dissects it, and anyway, because eventually it is heart body sharp, etc., etc. And the whole purpose of the novel is to show both biological evolution and human evolution, and how eventually I realize that there is God. The novel ends doesn't end very nicely because she then eventually comes out of the island and meets some people who don't talk very nice. He meets some mystics, he doesn't like them, and he goes back to the island. But that's another story. But this is the first evolutionary novel, right?
So the classical Muslim scholars had no problem with evolution, and neither should be in contemporary times. Uh, and, but I would say if you do have a problem, then they have to be part of the scientific community and do it, dethrone a theory. Yes, lots of theories that can be, yeah, the dethroned. I mean, one of the theories that may be dethroned now at the string theory, and there's also a question about string theory. It's been around for 20 years, and most visitors have accepted it. Now, doubts are beginning to happen about the string theory, and may not be around in the next 10 years. There's the loss of going on in particle physics and quantum mechanics, where things may change very, very rapidly, and the standard models and the model may be dethroned. Right? That's the but that did give a partnership. So that's what I think of. If you like, Ijaz literature as it has come to court, and it's all started with the. But it had a long history starting in 1920. But it became big with the publication of Maurice Bucay's book Islam, Bible, and Science, where he argued that Bible is not very scientific, but it's Quran Bible, science. The Quran does not scientific facts. When I was doing my year about looking at all that stuff, there was another guy who discovered the number 19, and he said that the code of the Quran was number 19, and every verse in the Quran was ended with 19, and lots of people who follow her. He did some computing with early computers. His book called The Computer Speaks, and Burmese the true nature of Paparanos and Irani. Eventually, he became so convinced himself that his name was Rashid Khalifa. But he always wrote Rashid Khalifa PhD. Then he became so convinced that he had discovered something very profound. He started describing himself as Rashid Khalifa, messenger of Allah. And as a result, he was killed in Australia somewhere. See you guys. But anyway, people get totally mad about this because it's a psychotherapy, right? In England, in the among the Muslim community, the white man converts Islam. Would be that look, Islam must be true. The white man is converted. So it's the same thing. Science is big, right? And the Quran has science in it. Therefore, this Quran must be correct and must be divine. The fact that the Quran is divine or not is a matter of belief. You believe it. Christians don't. Jews don't. Atheists don't. It's a matter of belief. God speaks to you, all because you are born Muslim. Right. It's a matter of belief. So keep the matter of beliefs within the domain, as Al-Biruni said. Use the methodologies to understand the metaphysics. We think how to interpret, and the methodologies for interpreting Quran in commentaries, the Quran are wise, a huge history of that. Do science separately as a objective scientific enterprise. But remember, as I said, the science not very equal. You need to bring your own values in there as well, and the values come in as science policy and as science funding, as the labor of the questions you ask. Right? But once the a scientific principle, call it fact in inverted commas or whatever, established, that as we were say, validated. Right. All right, you can open to discussion unless you want to ask some.
I have many questions.
Yes.
Well, Christopher did not define pseudoscience.
Oh, okay. So I different define pseudoscience because when I was doing it, looking at science, looking at how it does the picture, there's no such thing as pseudoscience. I mean, so I couldn't find a word for it. Right? How do I pin this down? So I call it Bucayism because it was based on Maurice Bucay's book. So Bucayism became a term and it was common term for about 10-50 years. Right? Pseudoscience is a more contemporary term. It only has history of 10-15 years. It's not it doesn't have a very big history in that sense. So pseudoscience will be anything that one
lacks objectivity. Two, does not have universal validity in the sense that every culture can interpret it. Can repeat the experiment and get exactly the same results. Uh, uh, and thus does not have universal validity and does not have consensus within a community. Part of the science is the science, dominant science has a consensus amongst the scientific community. And the consensus is just as important. That's where the paradigm functions, right? And the consensus drops or fails, the paradigm shifts. You know, okay. So that's what I will call we call pseudoscience in this sense. That is, unless you have a different definition, I don't know.
Well, I have two remarks. Yes. Then, of course, we can prove we have no transitional process. And the observation of the natural world proves exactly the opposite, which is the existence of a designer. So, the name, not only correct in the sense, you see the thing, and then
One of the things about science, when the Islamic science decade came in and they started writing textbooks, the I felt very, 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 because the Islamic science debate was started by me. We started precisely in 1979, September. I was writing a New Scientist. I wrote a cover story for New Scientist called Can Science Come Back to Islam? Right. And that's where both questions started. And then various movement developed, etc., etc. And in some of the textbooks, I saw, that finally Allah said this and Allah said that in a sense. There's the thing about science is you can't have the final prime mover because it ceases to be science. The function of science is for you to gain knowledge. So if the final mover is Allah, then what's the function? What function do you have? Right. So you can't you cannot invoke God as a final statement. You have to seek the solution yourself. Right? The moment you do that, and why are you doing in the final statement? You might as well invoke God much earlier and save yourself work in a sense. So the final statement cannot be in a sense attributed to the prime mover. Otherwise, the question stops. The question stop. Academic question stop. The inquiry stops in a sense. Okay. So what I will say to the teachers first, they're ignorant. They're ignorant in two forms. They do not know the history of Islam themselves. They have no understanding of history of Islamic science, which is a vast history. Let me tell you this how vast it is. So in 1960, George Soughton, Historian of Science, published 4 volumes of history. It's called The Introduction to History of Science. 4 volumes. So he's writing history from the beginning to now. So he wants to divide how do you, I mean, it's a huge history. How do you cope? Yeah. How do you cope with this history? So he gives like 50, 100-year period. So he gives his sections 50 to 100 years, right? So they may start, say, we can suppose it starts in 1100, so 1100 to 1200, one era, 1200 or 30 was 30 pretty be era. And then, and in each era, he names a scientist. So, the Arab Newton, Arab Catholicus, right? The first 2 volumes, the tool of Arab evolution scientists. Khwarizmi at Kindi, all the way, even in the 14th century, Khatun, 15th century, somebody else, right? That much history of science. So the Western history of science is only 300 years old, in that sense. So a few years ago, I was asked to give a lecture at the Royal Society of Science, the Royal Society, very big kind of in Britain, and they said we want you to tackle when did Islamic science decline? Right? So the journal thesis is that the Greeks developed science, then the Arabs conserved whatever the Greeks did, and then passed it on to Europe when student was where he's gone, he was talking about, the first enlightenment, first Renaissance. This was called the conveyor belt theory, where the Islamic science is essentially conveyor belt. It doesn't do anything, right? But Sarton proved that that's rubbish. And that's simply the way he did his history. Right? I was asked to write to do a paper, present paper, or actually it was a lecture on the decline of Islamic science. So my task was pinpoint when did this decline of Islamic science started, and that was published in Nature. And is also available in various places. It's also available in one of my books. When I started studying and I discovered, yes, it was. Most people will say the decline was 12th century. No, it wasn't. Then the most people will say the decline was 13th, 14th century. No, it wasn't. Then most people say decline is started when the Ottomans came to conquer the world and became an empire. No, it wasn't, because Ottoman produced hell of a lot. They produced so much work that even to this day we don't have all the manuscripts done. Then it was maybe in the 18th century. Only the genuine decline of Islamic thought and decline begins with the second half of the 300 period. Right? So there's a vast amount of science that we have done, that we have the cost to. So if your teachers were aware of the science, they will they bother reading the Life of Faith, right? Or bother reading Al-Jahiz, or bother reading Ibn Khaldun, or a lot of other things. They will realize that evolution is essentially a very much integral part of Islamic history. It's not outside Islamic history. And the other point I've already made, yes, of course, the Quran describes, wind and the air and this and the development, the tikas and all that. Yeah, these are all there, for you to think about, to reflect about, and go out and discover. It doesn't solve the problems of science. Hey, the teacher ought to be saying, look, the Quran is asking you to go and do biology.
But is it true that the information was not built by anyone inside the Pagi revelation?
That is, I don't know. I doubt it. I doubted it that people knew. I mean, even the Greeks knew a lot about fetuses, for God's sake. Like pigeons, they did so. So to say that nobody knew. But again, it's the point. The point here is this is a psychotherapy. This is a psychotherapy question. When nobody knew about this, so the Quran contains this, therefore it must be divine. Which means you have a very weak faith, in my opinion. Faith by definition does not need scientific proof. Otherwise, it's not faith. Yeah, belief has to be belief. The belief is objectively proved, it ceases to be belief. As I said, if we objectively produce, all the arguments for God are invalid, as we know, philosophically. But suppose we approved the existence of God objectively, conclusively, then there'd be no point in believing in it. Then everybody has to de facto believe or accept, rather. Yeah. So belief has to be belief in that sense. And the belief has its own methodology of exploration and understanding.
That what's about the conflict of belief in science? Can I believe in Adam and Eve and in evolution? No. But evolution is wrong. In fact, evolution is wrong. It's pseudoscience.
So yeah, hang on. Are we just carrying on with this rubbish because you think that's what you should be doing, or are you listening to what I'm saying? I am saying that both could be correct and both have their own methodology. There is nothing that says that just because you believe in one, we cannot believe in other. There are certain absurdities as well. Say, for example, if you read Al-Tarabi's history, the first one volume, are full of incredible mythology, which have become past part of Muslim kind of consciousness. So, for example, in the first or second volume, we discuss Adam and the height of Adam, and we're supposed to be several miles long and all that. And this pure mythology based on current anecdotal evidence that existed during antibiotic Kubarbia's writing his history. And of course, some people take you very seriously, and they kind of reading books on, which shows how degenerate the Muslim mind has become. First of all, They need to critique about it, look at his context and what is being before that to proceed any further. And of course, it doesn't make sense that like Adam was several miles long, and then he came to Earth and he put his feet. It was in Sri Lanka, and the second feet was somewhere in not too far from Jeddah, etc., etc. These are mythologies. This should become part of Muslim consciousness, because we take over historians. We don't take over historians as historians. What human beings were looking at history and on the context of the knowledge that they was available at that period. It's not. But when the body gets to the life of the prophet, then he becomes very objective, because then we lots of evidence and lots of conditions, and it becomes a very the whole methodology changes. When he's using anecdote and mythology, suddenly then he starts using evidence and traditions and this and that and references and what have you. All that has to be noted. In that was made a title of Adam was an exaggeration, but what about the existence of Adam is the phrase human? How the Bush then no. In Muslim theology, Adam was a prophet, and to be a prophet, you need followers. Sense. But I mean, the Adam and Eve story in the Quran is very allegorical and totally different from the kind of Genesis dominant story. But it's also called father, right? Who? Adam. No. Whose father? Adam. You're not yours? No, okay, not mine. Okay, mighty. No. Are you where are you getting all this? These guys, they thought all this? What? But they.
Pentoka.
Oh, that is fun.
Yeah, basically we can refer to you as Benny Eben. Just
But yeah, just because you say it's that's doesn't mean he was a father, sir. Yeah, but he doesn't mean he was actual father in that sense. Yes, uh, just as we are bunnies, why bunny this tribe, bunny that right. You can be look bunny Adam, like we are all children of Adam, but that sense. Uh, but belief systems should remain belief systems. And should be taught as belief systems. In the other, somebody else also.
Well, it's still next time now. Of course, he was just playing devil's advocate. I do not think a single thing of what I said about evolution. That I actually believe it.
First comment is like, I have already back to him. Adama in Greek means earth.
Yes, it's
And like, do Dam is also there. Like, yeah. So I can think. But yeah, my question is like also about this nature of the guidance.
Yeah.
Like, Parisuddin are described as the hudhud bird, the hukia bird.
Yeah.
Yeah, what is the nature of this guidance? And then also like when we talk about Quran in there walking, but like not all Muslim most is also there. At least this is hard of yeah. This those two, like what is the nature of this guidance, and how did our body carry these decks? Cool. I mean, we know that the plan is easy to memorize because of the rhythm and the rhyme and the structure and the so on and so forth, which is not necessary of the Arabic language, by the way. It's also Labara. So a lot of people carry in their heart because, but it's again a metaphor for having memorized the Quran. Yeah, they literally don't carry it in their heart. It's just they memorized. Interesting. I is a Malaysian friend who I've known for a very long time. He's a journalist, a businessman, and there was some sort of beach of Dewey, a village on Kuala Lumpur. So I went to see for this year. That is very kind care. We all went to mother. I mean, somebody pushed him. But we said, "Why, Jesus Christ, I mean, that was the most fantastic that I've ever heard. I have known him for like 40 years. I never knew that. When he finished, I said, Datto, I call him Datto because his name is Datto, the title was the Kathar. You said, this is very good, apart from whatever you read to me. Have you memorized that? You turn on and says, Zia and Hafiz.
I didn't know. And his son, who happened to live 3 doors from my house in London, he's 30, he's also a Hafiz. But again, you wouldn't know. And doesn't talk around 10 people is enough. So people do take it in their heart in that sense. And the point I was making is that many Muslims have very deep emotional attachment to the Quran, right? So they carry the copy with them. So my mother always had a copy, no matter what. She always carries a copy, no matter where we go. And when my son got married here, my daughter, unknowingly, he insisted that at the bride he carry a copy of the Quran. They came and asked me. I said, "Who said that?" They said, "Mahat, your daughter." And she said that, "Okay, I'm not going to argue it." Right. So there is that. That people have a very deep attachment. Um, and the guidance I would say is both worldly and spiritual, in the sense that at the end of the day, you see, any of the questions we ask in science at this moment in time, or asking at this moment in time, are ethical questions. Right? Remember, one of my criteria was where values come in. Is the question you ask. So, do you want to do this? Do you ought to do this because it can be done, or you should avoid doing it? Right? So, certain kind of bioengineering, whether we ought to do it, can we do it, or should we avoid doing it? In a sense, right? But these questions are not asked, as I showed yesterday in the presentation. Right? These questions are not asked, and this is our job. At least, if we are not getting our hand dirty in doing real science, it is our job at least to ask these ethical questions, because they are the guiding steps that we get from our secret texts. And of course, there are the spiritual and metaphysical life research.
Will be shy. So what have you been taught about Alan evolution? Is evolution tackled in schools?
No, not really, but there has been a lot of instances where it was taught that it's our father. And
And it was your father, our father.
yes,
But I mean, I see no problem with it. I mean, okay, it's Bani Adam. Okay, yeah, there is a father of mankind. So what? I mean, how does that and say, okay, I do evolution. So what's the big deal? Why are you so worried in that sense? So what should the cause of concern will be to, to say that I don't believe in it, I don't accept evolution at all as a scientist. I don't accept evolution as an ordinary person. Nobody cares. But it's of interest. That's the cause of concern. Yeah, that's the cause of concern. In my opinion, that's the cause of concern. In that sense.
Why is it? Again, there are many scientists who don't, including a colleagues. I'm not going to name any names because it's out here, but there's a point of,
As a part of scientific community, consensus of the scientific community, it works, and we have a lot of evidence to show. So basically, you're denying, you're denying all the evidence that exists and all the scientific literature that are there. You know,
are you sure it's eventually some conspiracy from the West to uphold something that doesn't make mostly pay?
I'm afraid there are lots of conspiracies from the West. One conspiracy is happening in Gaza right now. You see how they sold human rights to us and what they're telling human rights is now, right? We were sold one genocide, right? So these guys had the Holocaust and the Great Genocide in history, and now another genocide is happening in front of their eyes, in front of television cameras, and they've denied it. So there are lots of conspiracies from the West. So let's not undermine. Let's be. However, let's not get paranoid, right? In the scientific literature, let's look at what is out there, and let's look at how paradigms shifting or not shifting. So let's work within the field rather than outside the field shouting these slogans and useless things that have no impact on anything.
Sir, the question that I asked you in the morning about the Judaization of Islam, It was, I want to open it more. It was about more about does Muslims or m- all over the world now need to filter out their Islamic heritage in a sense that what is pragmatic, let's do it, and what is not, what is nonsense, let's just put it away. Like this Beni Adam thing, or the story of that the sons of Adam, two brothers marry each other, and this is how we pluralize. But uh, it will also contradict with the essence of Islam because we will make it a more laïque religion. So, what is the best solution to both ways? To be a Muslim and at the same time not be outdated and yeah, live in our
You should be exercise of criticism. It's you were talking about your birth. Yes, that. Um, and many people have suggested, for example, that we need to wait in this. Even say I as I was referred to the real camera that in Turkey there this great project is supposed to be going up for year many years and that's they're refusing the population. I know it's finished, but being population because I don't know the scale of Malano part, right? Maybe there's a lot of amenities hard here. Yeah, in what's this? What's the whole section has pathology. It's pretty over. Yeah, do not do without that. There's lots of rubbish has been done, and even that there's a, for example, the hadith was circulated during the ISIS war in Syria. That when God created Earth, He created the Syrians first, and I don't know if you've seen that hadith. I mean, it's but so God. So somebody has to stand up and say, "Hang on, this a minute, right? Enough of this nonsense. This doesn't make sense." However, it's not easy to do that because there's a whole branch of eschatology going stuff. So even Fazl Rahman, it's respectable modernist scholar, has a has a weakness for eschatology. So in his Quranic ethics, he has a whole chapter on eschatology. Uh, uh, so it's not going to be easy, but I think we have to actually take a much more critical look. In that sense. Very interesting. After 2-3 months ago, the king of Saudi Arabia, Andias, made a very interesting statement. He said, uh, "Our country is being ruled uh, by hadiths which were produced 200 years after the death of the Prophet." Did you see that statement?
yeah. You saw that Hedwig. He said also, I'm not gonna risk 30 years more.
Yeah. So, I mean, people are kind of realizing that there's something seriously wrong.
Yeah. I mean, almost everything in Saudi Arabia is based on a hadith or some manufactured hadith rather than anything to do with, uh, uh, with the sacred text. So this it has become a major problem.
Can we really rely on?
You can rely on early hadith according to the own criteria developed by classical scholars, which one, it does not negate Quran, two, it doesn't negate this, and three, it makes contextual sense. So if you follow their own rule, right, the roots of this that pretty very makes sense. Yeah.
So okay, I was always curious that the rise of Hadith was perhaps a few hundred years after the finality or the conclusion chapter, right? Yes, but it was closer. So it wasn't like 500 or 600 years. It was very close, right? Now, if you compare that to the Talmud, that was a huge Talmud. The Talmud is the Bani Israel or the Jewish, well, actually the Jewish version, not Bani Israel kind of broke away long time back, the whole history there. But the Jewish interpretation was from the the rabbis interpreting it in the diaspora. That was much later, thousands of years later, after the Torah and the Mishnah, the Gemara and all of that, right? So maybe it is closer to that scientific period, because a lot of the scientific studies and research was going on around that time, and this was kind of like a response to that, connecting the religion, connecting the logic, the literature and the culture to that, the response.
It was very this, and it's even more sophisticated when you think is a discover, deliver, used, evolved or whatever during the kind of middle of the 7th century, 8th century, right? In their sense. However, I would count. We find out it is a human endeavor, and methodology, especially involved with criticism, is subject to error. So we didn't do a 100% error-proof job because we couldn't as human beings. Right. But the interesting thing is, Bukhari collected what? 1.5 billion of these stuff, something like that. We had 2,700 in the collection. We did the rest. Question them is, what happened to the rest? The answer is they're still with us. All of them. And there have been various attempts to have kind of fake these connections. I think one was published like 3 or 4 years ago in London. But even, I mean, the problem with dogmatism is that even the most ridiculous of this is devoutly believed by the devout. And by today, Santi, Rasulullah, what?
Maybe the last question, and it's a reflection at the same time. Is the solution to be more Quran centric and less dependent to hadith and the other things?
I would say so. But even then, I would say that see the context.
And does Muslims as Muslims, is it easy to accept that? To accept such a huge critique?
Really, you could work is creating really what I was talking about. What is changing every day? And change itself is changing life. So dogmatism is our cut it for us. It's different we do it, we have to survive. Because you need a bit more, be on a bit more solid terms. But a dogmatic belief are essentially low to ruin. And from a time that you find yourself with some, we have to be a bit more database. Or want of a better word, I don't know right word correct what I want to say, but in the want of a better word, that people conscious of the real world and what's happening and how things are changing.
You mentioned earlier that belief in the Quran just because there's scientific proof backing it up means that your faith is weak.
No.
So what that I understood. Alright, not to defend my student. Yeah, I agree that that shows.
So what I'm saying is that, so this guy comes here and says to me, oh look, there's a relativity in the Quran. This father is a real thing. I'm not making it up. Somebody did that and somebody wrote something when he says that. So all I can say to him is, look, mate, you were very weak faith. Because if the Quran is giving you relativity, then by your poor Einstein spent all his life trying to work it all out, right? And Quran doesn't contain relativity or electricity or cosmology or whatever.
It also cuts off many Muslims. I mean, if you regret relativity to appreciate the Quran, what about all those Muslims who lived over time?
Who didn't have any legacy precisely, including any prophets, by the way.
Yeah, so I mean, this is the in my book Exploration in Islamic Science, where I do talk a lot about Quranism. I mean, I basically argue, the analogy I gave about converts. So if in England, like amongst the Pakistani, Indian, or other kind of community, if a white man converts to Islam, it is immediately seen as the superiority of Islam. Okay, right. He will immediately call himself Sheikh, right? He will immediately have large amount of following, and somehow large amount of funding will appear. Huh? Yes, Sheikh. I should have mentioned. Okay, and numerous convert bike sheikhs. Some of them are on YouTube. Some of them are, you know, uh, because they make us feel good. They make us think our faith is solid over here. So this is the same thing. When you see, oh, look, science, there's a scientific miracle in the Quran, then you kind of feel your Quran is divine. Look at our it gives us sense of superiority in that sense.
What if you only believe in Quran because it aligns with science and you trust science and you believe in science? You just become an atheist.
Yeah, then it's, then it's not a big matter of belief in that sense.
But then we need a reason to believe in something.
You find your own reason.
It's the
Not for me to give you a reason.
No, I'm not asking you for a reason. I'm saying, what if that reason is because it aligns with science?
Yeah, I suspect there are many Muslims who are probably uh, more inclined to Islam because they see scientific miracles in the Quran. I know many of them in Saudi Arabia, for example, where it's big industry. During the 70s, when I was there, then the industry started emerging, and I was shouting at them, saying, "Hey, what are you, Pakal bhai? This is the story." This is exactly what I said to them. Um, a- and the more and more I saw that, the more and more I got angry and frightened and frustrated. A friend of mine, Jar, is professor geology, did geology in Sheffield. He used to teach us. We used to have club groups, and he was teach us Quranic interpretation and bit of Islamic history and stuff. So I met him several years later in a book, Geology, the Quran. You're talking about Professor. What the hell? Like, Professor, are you mad? I looked at the book, I was laughing at. Uh, um, the guy I had got it grant, went back to Pakistan, and I got even more money from Barlow's Beth to experiment on jinns. Right?
Yeah, the HEC funded it. Yeah.
The initial fund
Yeah.
we got from there for him to go back.
Yeah.
So we have the number of bands we made it Puno
No, they claimed renewable energy source.
was. And when I came to me and said, no money, and there's somebody staying and doing geology in University East Anglia. So what's the problem? No money, house, blah, blah, blah. So I got 3 of my friends. All of them are alive. I believe one night. I believe, I scap, are you money? So, okay, we pay for your PhD. One condition. You finish your PhD, you go to Pakistan, start in department, there, Pakistan need geology. He paid for his PhD, he got his PhD, and what the first thing he did? Fucking bastard got a job in University of Aberdeen. Right? He must have spent 30,000-40,000 pounds on that guy in those days when I was freelancing. So because the money was well-known architect who would come up large dust. And so so this guy, the guy who was doing the jinn, we sent him to do physics in Pakistan, right? And he was, decoding the bit of the salam, a particle physics, and he's very well trying to find jinn and control them. And so there is a kind of madness to the whole thing. Much like it does control which mega rich, what? My maid controls it. I'm sure she does. Happy, so every day, this is why, in fact, you said I haven't done any work on this. I actually wrote a piece in the New Scientist. I actually wrote a piece in the New Scientist, a last piece I ever wrote for New Scientist. I mean, it must be like, and after several years of working with New Scientist, I wrote a piece saying, I'm sorry I started the Islamic science debate. I had nothing to do with it. Do not come and tell me that it is about experimenting with jinn or finding miracle thing. I have a totally different notion of science. And if you really want to know what I understand by science, read my book, Explorations Flying Science or Science and Third World, or read some of my kind of heavyweight stuff. So since then, I've done everything on the subject, and it has become worse and worse. It has not become better. Right. So every time I see it, I get even more heavy in that sense.
Okay. How about applause? Thank you, Zia.
I think we should proceed to the school to arrange a transplantation for tomorrow because the gene.
Oh, I think Didi's come and Nasser has come and talked to me about it. Nasser? Is it Nasser? Oh, it's Sabat. Sabat. Oh, he talked. Yeah, he can.
Okay, so that was fixed. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Like, yeah, here we can continue the conversation in full, buddy.